Man, I love the moon. Would you say the moon is masculine or feminine?
It's a giant ball of rock. It doesn't have a gender. And to all you people who talk about how its properties metaphorically relate to a certain gender, why? Why is it necessary to gender inanimate objects, and why is it so important that it is literally the second thing said in this video after, man, I love the moon? We can't even make gender labels apply to all people.
However, our celestial father is most definitely the sun. It's because of our father above and our mother below that allows all of this life to exist. The moon is actually neither, which makes me think it must be more like a cousin.
So if someone is not one of your parents, then they are your cousin? Hey Tori, are you my cousin?
No!
But perhaps what's more curious about old Lady Luna is that her existence has actually never been explained by modern science.
We have several hypotheses on the moon's formation. The most widely accepted is the giant impacts hypothesis, which I will cover in more detail when you butcher it in a minute. The hypothesis still needs to be refined to account for a couple things, such as the facts that rocks from the crust of both the Earth and the moon have identical isotopic signatures, but this may be explained through tweaking the giant impacts hypothesis, which to date is the best explanation we have.
Who needs science to explain things?
Right, I mean, I know you don't.
If your previous videos are anything to go by, you don't either, Jordan.
But isn't it interesting that using science we can build nuclear weapons?
Nuclear, not nuclear. Who are you, George Bush?
What's stranger? The moon is actually far too big to be a natural satellite of the Earth.
If it were too big to be a natural satellite of the Earth, it wouldn't be orbiting the Earth. Sure, our moon is the largest moon in the solar system relative to the size of the planet it orbits, unless, of course, you include a certain dwarf planet, which has a moon roughly half its diameter. And yes, I said dwarf planet. Pluto is not a planet. Get over it.
Our moon is actually larger than Pluto.
And so are the moons Ganymede, Titan, Callisto, Io, Europa, and Triton. Not so special now, is it?
The current leading theory in science is that something like a Mars-sized planet-like rock came out of nowhere and hit the Earth, and then it became the moon.
The giant impacts hypothesis, and yes, hypothesis, not theory, does indeed suggest there was a collision between Earth and a Mars-sized object, but it says that as a result of the collision, debris was flung into Earth's orbit that coalesced to form the moon. Nobody is saying that the Mars-sized mass hit the Earth, bounced off, and became the moon.
And when those physics didn't work out, they came up with a new theory.
Wait, replay that one part.
The current leading theory in science is...
Now the second.
And when those physics didn't work out, they came up with a new theory.
How is it the current leading theory if it's been replaced by a new one?
That said that the same planet-like rock-like thing hits the planet, bounces around, and then hits it again, and then becomes the moon. Needless to say, the physics still didn't work.
Source, please. I cannot find anything that says a Mars-sized object hit the Earth and bounced off of it multiple times before becoming the moon. You see, when you butcher science like this, it makes people see scientists as stupid for actually thinking something like this could happen. Then, mistrust in science grows, funding to science is cut, and progress toward doing anything important grinds to a halt. If you're going to criticize a scientific hypothesis or theory, make sure you aren't first building a straw man of it.
Have you ever heard anything about it being... hollow?
Okay. By knowing the size of the moon and the strength of gravity on its surface, we can determine the moon's average density, and it comes out to 3.346 grams per cubic centimeter, which makes it the second densest moon in the solar system after Jupiter's moon Io. Any empty space inside the moon would mean that the rest of the moon would have to be denser to compensate. Besides, all the evidence we have points to the moon having layers just like the Earth does, including a small inner core made of iron.
In November of 1969, NASA crashed a lunar module into the moon, causing the equivalent of 1 ton of TNT. NASA said that the moon reverberated like a gong for half an hour.
I assume you're talking about Apollo 12, because that's the only thing I can find NASA doing with the moon in November of 1969. They left sensors on the moon to record its seismic activity, but they did not crash into the moon and did not explode anything on its surface. From the data collected, we learned that seismic waves are attenuated, that is, they get weaker, less on the moon than on Earth. That doesn't suggest the moon is hollow. It suggests a cold, dry interior. We also learned that meteor impacts cause fracturing in the upper crust of the moon, but those fractures only go down about 20 kilometers. This could be because increased pressure forces the fractures closed, or it could just mean that there is a change in chemical composition of the moon. Again, none of this suggests a hollow moon.
It vibrated in a way as if it were hollowed out, with giant hydraulic damper struts inside of it.
Just went over this, no it didn't.
The surface of the moon contains minerals like titanium.
Titanium is an element, not a mineral, mainly because you are not going to find it in pure form in nature.
But also processed metals like brass and mica.
Source, please. Can't find anything about there being brass on the moon. Mica isn't a metal, it's a naturally occurring mineral.
It also contains something called uranium-236 and neptunium, which are both minerals that have never been found to occur naturally.
Neptunium? Did you mean Neptunium? Neptunium isn't a thing. Also, minerals occur naturally by definition, so if it doesn't occur naturally, it's not a freaking mineral. And both uranium-236 and neptunium are found naturally in trace amounts on Earth. Sure, uranium-236 isn't very abundant, and a half-life of about 23 million years means most of it has decayed, but we can still detect some. And in any uranium ore, you'll have traces of neptunium, because sometimes the uranium will absorb neutrons and beta decay to neptunium.
This means that at least some of the rocks on the moon are most likely synthetic.
No, it doesn't. I just talked about how uranium-236 and neptunium can occur on Earth naturally, so why not the moon?
And while it's only a theory, I wouldn't say it's illogical to come to the conclusion that it could be artificially created.
Here you go misusing that word again. A scientific theory is a well-substantiated explanation of some aspects of the natural world that is acquired through the scientific method and repeatedly tested and confirmed through observation or experimentation. Your theory is not well substantiated. It was not acquired through the scientific method, and if anything, all observation and experimentation seems to do is contradicts you. So yes, it is illogical to conclude the moon is artificially created.
Also, you know the craters on the moon?
Intimately.
Kinky.
Well, craters should vary in depth due to the size and impact of the various space rocks that hit them, right? We can tell that there was a difference in the meteor sizes that hit the moon by the diameters of each crater. And yet, how come all of them, across the board, are the same depth?
Except the craters on the moon do vary in depth. The deepest is over 5 miles, or 8 kilometers deep, while others have little to no apparent depth. For comparison, you could fit almost all of Mount Everest into the deepest crater on the moon.
Look at that quote from a NASA scientist. It's easier to explain the non-existence of the moon than to explain its existence.
Here's another one. The best explanation for the moon is observational error. The moon does not exist.
And now you're taking tongue-in-cheek quotes seriously. It can be frustrating to figure out how something formed when no one was around to record how it happened, so scientists will make quotes like these jokingly after struggling for years to put the pieces of evidence together.
David Icke's research led him to shaman around the world.
Most of David Icke's claims are based on his belief that the world is controlled by lizard people, so forgive me if I have trouble taking anything he says seriously.
Zulu tribes speak of the moon being an egg. They symbolize it to be an egg for good reason.
Here we go with somehow the ancient people with no technology who lived in small groups and didn't have the ability to communicate with others all around the world and share ideas, and who have missed out on centuries to millennia of collective learning that we have today, somehow knew more than we could ever know. And what did they know? That the moon is an egg. Well, that must have been a giant bird.
The ancient African and Sumerian legends talk of two brothers, Wauwang and Mpanku.
Wauwang and Mpanku? Are these names for someone's testicles?
This says here that the rocks on the moon are older than the Earth itself.
The rocks from the moon that we've dated range from about 3.16 billion years old to 4.5 billion years old. Not older than the Earth. Now, they're older than a lot of rocks we find on Earth's surface, but this can be explained by the fact that Earth is far more geologically active.
You know, I think I've only ever seen one side of the moon. I wonder why it doesn't spin like other planets.
Because it's tidally locked with the Earth. See, the strength of Earth's gravity, or the gravity of any objects for that matter, decreases with distance. So the Earth pulls on the side of the moon closest to it slightly stronger than the side of the moon furthest away, which, over time, slowed down the moon's rotation until one side of the moon always faced the Earth. The moon is having the same effects on Earth, and each Earth day is slightly longer than the last, unless a major earthquake redistributes some of Earth's mass or another event like that takes place. It's just the moon has a weaker gravitational effects on Earth, so it's taking longer, but if you were to leave the Earth-Moon system alone long enough, then one side of the Earth would eventually always face the moon. That's what has already happened with Pluto and its moon.
Have you ever noticed that the size and position of the moon is exactly in the right place to create a perfect solar eclipse?
First, the moon is not big enough to put the entire Earth in its shadow. And yes, it's cool that the moon comes directly between the Earth and the sun when it is the right distance away in its slightly elliptical orbit, so we can have a total solar eclipse. But there's no special meaning to it.
And just like the tides, it even bends the water in our bodies. That's why on nights of the full moon, there's always an increase of violent crimes.
Tides work on the principle I just explained. The moon pulls on the close side of Earth a bit more than the far side, so water in the oceans moves toward the side closest to the moon. The moon also pulls on the Earth a bit more than the remaining water on the far side, creating 2 high tides a day. But there is no significant bending of the water in our bodies because over a distance of roughly 239,000 miles, 6 feet doesn't make much of a difference in the strength of the moon's pull on us. And the gravitational pull of the moon doesn't vary with phase, it varies with the distance from Earth, and the moon can be closest to Earth at any phase. As far as violent crime and full moons go, a few small studies have produced some correlations, but larger studies and systematic reviews have failed to replicate the results or find enough evidence to determine a causal relationship.
They say that the beings who put it there were trying to bring a new frequency to the planet, or maybe even provide us with some sort of resonation or gravitational wave that was vital for our survival.
Bring a new frequency to the planet or provide us with some sorts of resonation or gravitational wave that was vital for our survival? I know what those words mean individually, but the way you put them together is just word salad.
I've read that the Earth isn't even in the right place in the solar system anymore.
So you think the Earth shouldn't be right in the middle of the sun's habitable zone?
The story goes that at one point, the Earth used to exist between Mars and Jupiter, and may have even been slightly larger than it is today. But it was hit, and it flew off course, creating the asteroid belt, which is mostly frozen water and rock debris, and wound up in a new orbit, right here.
First off, none of the planets are that close to the sun. Also, Nibiru is a supposed planet that some conspiracy groups think was supposed to hit the Earth in 2012, not something that's hit the Earth in the past, creating the asteroid belts. You're not even getting your conspiracies right.
But because of the impact of what happened, this planet was going to die.
Planets are abiotic. If you mean life on the planet, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have started if the Earth was somewhere out where the asteroid belt is today.
And it needed some help to keep it spinning and keep its orbit proper. And thus, the moon was put there by some advanced alien race or a higher form of consciousness who saw it as a requirement for the planet's survival.
Conservation of angular momentum would have kept the Earth spinning without a moon, and having a moon wouldn't stabilize its orbit around the sun. The only reasons an orbit would be unstable are if it got close enough to other planets to disrupt its orbits, or if it got so close to the sun that it gradually got slowed by gas particles around the sun.
Which would explain why the Earth-to-Moon ratio is found within the human energy field.
Wait, what?
Then, events such as the falling of Atlantis and rising back to consciousness could take place under circumstances that otherwise couldn't have happened.
So if something that didn't happen never happens, then other things that didn't happen also couldn't have happened. We know extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, not more extraordinary claims that you claim are evidence.
As you can see, this is the Egg of Life, mapped over Leonardo da Vinci's Canon of Man, along with a proportionate 8x8 grid. Around the Egg of Life, you see 2 rings. This is the zona pellucida, the membrane around the structure.
We're trying to make drawings mean something they don't by drawing random crap on them again, aren't we? Besides, I personally like my version better.
First, we have to identify the male and female side of the equation.
We now have to assign genders to parts of equations? Why is gender so important to you, Jordan? And furthermore, why aren't social justice groups tearing you to shreds over crap like this?
On the top level, you have a circle and a square. They fractal down to the 8 physical spheres and the 8x8 grid of squares. See how you can draw a circle that fits perfectly inside of these circles, and you'll get a circle that's just slightly smaller than the 4 squares put together? It just so happens to also fit perfectly around the edge, balancing between the inner circles and the outer larger circle. Now, if we take the 4 squares and use them as a measure, we can create a new circle, slightly larger than the smaller one we just drew. If we move it to the top, it pushes out beyond the inner circle a little bit, and what we're left with is the inner and outer edge of the zona pellucida, and a delineation of the human energy field. This is the location of the 13th chakra, by the way, at the very top of our energy field above our head.
Yep, we're drawing stuff again. Okay, here we go. Here's the Vitruvian man with my added touch. There's empty space between his arms and the ground that we will fill with these 2 rectangles. Now for his spread feet and raised arms, they form these trapezoidal empty spaces. Finally, there is a triangular empty space between his feet.
You rearrange the shapes you get from these empty spaces, and then you get a rocket ship.
But using the tip of the zona pellucida as a radial point between it and the square to create a new sphere, this then delineates the field of the 13th chakra. The ratio between this new sphere and a sphere based off of this square, the physical form of the Earth, is the exact same ratio as that of the Earth and the Moon.
And then the rocket ship flew into the moon, and thus Leonardo da Vinci predicted the moon landing.
You'll also notice, too, that the zona pellucida has actually merged with the square around the body and planet to create the phi ratio. It's a bridge to a higher consciousness.
How is the number 1.618 a bridge to anything, and how would it take you to a higher consciousness? Also, what is a higher consciousness? I want a concrete definition that allows one to differentiate between someone who has reached higher consciousness, someone of normal consciousness, and someone who is just making stuff up. So don't give me equally vague explanations like transcending the material reality, or achieving godlike awareness, or consciousness of consciousness. On the last one, the vast majority of people who are conscious of the facts they are conscious, so it's nothing special.
In the circle and square diagram, to create the phi ratio, the circumference of a circle must be equal to the perimeter of a square.
That's not how math works. A circumference of a circle can have the same measurement as the perimeter of a square, and that value can be any number. It doesn't have to be phi. And before somebody says, no, he was talking about some other measurement of those shapes when the perimeter is equal to the circumference, I am just reading the equation he has literally written out right there.
When you calculate the perimeter of the square that would be around the physical Earth, it comes to 31,680 miles, which is the diameter of the Earth times 4. To get the circle around the Earth is a little bit more tricky because you have the moon's involvement. You have to imagine the moon is perfectly placed against the Earth without going into it at all. Then we take the diameter of the Earth and the diameter of the moon, add them together, and multiply by pi. It comes out at 31,667.
Holy crap, they're almost the exact same numbers.
So by putting an imaginary square around the Earth, and then bringing the moon to where it is tangent to the surface of the Earth, and then drawing an imaginary circle around it, you can measure the perimeter of the square and the circumference of the circle and get 2 similar numbers. I'd be more impressed if that had any physical meaning, but it doesn't, and with enough mathematical trickery, you can find imaginary significance in anything.
There's a 13-mile difference, but 13 miles is nothing when you consider that the ocean rises nearly 27 miles around the equator.
How can it rise 27 miles when the maximum depth of any ocean on Earth is only 6.831 miles? The Earth itself has an equatorial bulge of about 26.6 miles, but that's the whole planet, not the ocean.
So what does all of this mean to us, Mr. Patch?
Nothing. But that's not what you're going to say, is it?
It's there for a reason, for a chance. A chance that we might just make the most important decision that we've ever made as a species, and create together a new way of life on this planet. It's up to the collective, to all of mankind. Do we choose love? Or do we choose chaos and war? Maybe a little bit of both from the looks of it right now.
What does the moon have to do with decision-making? I can make decisions just fine without consulting the moon.
The moon appears to offer us the opportunity to change, to become aware, to grow. But it won't make the decision for us. That's up to us.
So you just admitted we have to make these decisions. So I'm still confused. What does any of this have to do with the moon?
Okay, you've officially blown my mind hole clean off.
What's a mind hole?
This seems to be evidence of a long-lost secret that has to do with our evolution.
What evidence? Jordan, you still haven't provided any. Only vague conjectures, which last I checked weren't evidence.
Either way, I still love the moon, man.
Me too. Want some beans?
Beans? Is that why you two are shitting out such nonsense?
More than anything ever, Mr. Patch. Anything ever.
More than anything ever? I can think of a long list of things I would like more than beans. Number 1 on the list is for this video to end. Wait, it's over? Yes!